So if I could wave a magic wand in order to make Rochester even more entrepreneurial and have a greater economic entrepreneurial ecosystem, I think I would wish not for more technologists and scientists. We have a lot of great ones, more welcome, but I think the biggest need is more entrepreneurs, which specifically are serial entrepreneurs who've started many businesses, and also entrepreneurs that have actually scaled things rapidly and successfully. In other words, I think I would wish for more people like Ken Wasnock, who we have with us today. The kind of person that when he was 10 decided to become an entrepreneur, and he started selling worms and Christmas cards. I presume you were using different marketing strategies for those two products? And then when he was in his 20s, he started a company, we'll talk about it quite a bit I'm sure today, called Concentrix, which scaled from 0 employees to over 400. Then he went on to have other successes, and most recently and now, he is president and CEO of Garden Trends, which has a history dating back to the 19th century in this community, and he is now in the midst of trying to disrupt another industry. And maybe let's start with that. First of all, welcome.
Sure. Thank you.
Is this the first time you've ever followed a belly dancer?
Yeah, and as she was up here, I was thinking, there's no way I'll ever be able to follow that.
No. Luckily, when they videotape this, they won't know what we're talking about. So. But everybody else saw a very lovely show before this. So yes, everyone should come out to RocGrowth in person. There are reasons to come in person as well. And maybe, Ken, if you want to maybe get a little closer to the mic when you answer these questions, maybe talk a little bit about Garden Trends. What is its rich history, and what are you hoping to do with it going forward?
So, well, it's kind of interesting how I ended up at Garden Trends. I was a portfolio CEO for Soros Private Equity. And we had sold our last operating company in 2014. And I had a transition period, and I was looking for another opportunity. At the time that I was with Soros, there were some years where I was just living on the road. One year I had 41 trips in and out of Rochester Airport, and I have young kids. Well, I should say young kids. They were young kids, and now they're teenagers. My better half, Nadeem, over here, between her and I, we have 12, 13, 14, and 15. So I really didn't want to live my life on the road, flying out on a Sunday night and coming back and flying back on a Thursday, flying down to Boston or New York or D.C. And so I was looking for an opportunity locally, and I had grown up in a very a small town named Medina, New York, as a farm town. My grandfather had a small multi-generational farm, and I was always aware of Harris Seeds. And while I was looking, all of a sudden on LinkedIn, I see that they were looking for a new CEO. So, kind of a history buff. I got a lot of geeky history hobbies, including what I refer to as historical ground imaging, which is where you take a stick with a computer on it and wave it around. Some people call it metal detecting, but that's really uncool. So I've rebranded it to historical ground imaging. And so I've always been a history buff. I like, Nadeem will tell you the best estate sale that will ever take place is my estate sale, because it'll be the estate sales of everybody else's estates. So when I saw the opportunity, I reached out to the Dickus family, who is it's a Chicago-based family, and they own the company. And I knew it was a very old and historical company. And when I first talked to Bai Dickus, who's a very well-known and accomplished entrepreneur, he's in his mid-80s, he said, Ken, I saw your resume, and he goes, we're really, really impressed. He goes, but I need to tell you right now, he goes, we're never going to sell this company, ever. He goes, you've kind of, your whole career, you've built companies and sold them. And he goes, and that's not what this is about. And he says, are you still interested? And I said, sure. And so, ended up, looking at it a little bit further. And what I came to realize is this was really just an incredible opportunity. It was a very old and established company. So, it was a company that was started in 1879. And, at one point it was, the largest seed provider to farmers in the Northeast. So, it was really a great opportunity to come into a company in an industry that hasn't been what I kind of refer to as it hasn't been disrupted. Largely a lot of the things that they're doing today they're doing them the same way they had done them, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And, it really, because of that, it really appealed to me. And I've been here just over a year now. I've got some of my great team back here. And we're really looking at this as an opportunity to come in and take this company with this long, deep, rich history of success, and and really position it to be a dominant player in the seed industry, in the horticulture industry, for years to come by applying a lot of big data and technology and gaining competitive advantages that a lot of our competitors aren't utilizing at this point in time.
And no doubt, a lot of the success that you will have in this current company came from lessons you learned from previous efforts. And maybe if you could talk a little bit, especially maybe about Concentrix and how it got started.
Sure.
and that story.
Wow. Yeah, Concentrix. Concentrix. I started Concentrix. It originally was called Matrix, and I was working as a corporate sales rep for Herco Computers. Anybody remember Herco Computers? It was quite a while ago, right? Yeah. And I started working on an account with Thompson Publishing, who had just recently had bought Lawyers Cooperative Publishing, another very old company in Rochester. And they were just at that point in time when they were moving from traditional print publishing into digital publishing. And I had sold them a whole pile of computers. And being a young man from a small town, a blue collar family, I got what I thought was a very, very large commission check at the time, which was like $30,000. And I had gotten to know a lot of the individuals at the company, and they were talking about how they, as they were making this migration, this transition from traditional print to digital publishing, that they were looking for companies in the area that provided digital services. And one of the things they were looking for is companies that would actually do like the media replication and so forth. And, it was one of those things where they would literally take all the court cases throughout the month and have to get them into a format that, you could search and retrieve and then get them out to their customers in very short order. One of those things I never even thought of. I didn't even realize, that there was companies out there doing that. And at the time, it was floppy diskettes. And so I went back to Doug Herco and I said, hey, Doug, I kind of ran across this opportunity. They're looking for somebody that does this. And I knew I just had what I thought was a big commission check at the time. And I said, hey, is this something we should be looking at? And he looked at me and says, there's no money in that. He said, just go out and find the next big deal. Sell the next 100 computers. And, I felt like there was an opportunity there. And I started looking around and trying to see what type of equipment I would need to provide the service. Found out that $30,000 really isn't a lot of money when it comes to, having the equipment to start something like that. But I had made several friends at Herco that had come out of RIT, a lot of bright young men and women, and they had basically agreed to help me build the equipment that I would need to start the company in exchange for a beer. And so we actually, we built the equipment, and it was manual equipment. But in the meantime, I had gone back to Thompson and asked them if I did this, if they'd give me business, and that's kind of how it took off from there. And a lot of it, a lot of it was timing. It was just at the point in time where things were going from print to digital. And where early on it was very much around just information like legal briefs and so forth. As every time the media expanded and you went from 1.2 to 1.4, 3.5 inch, it allowed for more companies to start using that medium as a way to distribute information. And then when it went to CDs, that opened up a whole other realm. So we just started kind of following that out and ended up, working with Xerox and with Kodak, and the company grew very, very quickly. My sister's over here. She early on was my right hand. We did it together. And there was one time where the building we were in, there was a Jamaican drug cartel working out of the same building and running an illegal casino at night. So yeah, but we did manage to go from that and grew the company very, very quickly, and were able to capitalize it. And ultimately, when the internet came to be, and I know that sounds strange, but there was a time where there was not a whole lot of internet around, and there was a lot of dial-up services. But when the internet started to come out, we really saw an opportunity to expand. And at that point, we were doing a lot of marketing materials for companies like Xerox. And I had created a concept to, have a company that would do marketing differently than had been done previously. Up to that point, a lot of marketing was traditional mass marketing, where, you would throw a lot of what up against the wall and see what stuck. And, the ROI would be just based purely on, what transactions were created and what revenue was created, and was it enough to offset the cost of the of that campaign. And we were wanted to create a new marketing company whereby we'd put ourselves in between our customers and their prospects and their customers, and start collecting data on all those interactions. And in doing so, we put a lot more intrinsic value on not just the transaction but data, so that ultimately we could help our customers better anticipate a buying decision, which would obviously drive revenues. We would track the effectiveness of the various communications and the engagements and the conversions, so that we would also know how people would want to be communicated with, which would ultimately reduce Marcom expense, because we would know that certain types of communications were just going to be ineffective. And ironically, the other part about it, although it was very much computer driven, it also increased the level of intimacy between our customers and their prospects. People felt like they were being much more in touch with their particular needs. So at the time when we were building out Concentrix in the 90s, we referred to it as one-to-one marketing, and today it's just referred to as marketing. And I remember I used to give talks, and people would always inevitably say, it sounds a lot like Big Brother. But ironically, a lot of the things that we were doing back then, it's nothing now. And there was a lot of saber rattling around privacy and so forth. But again, the company grew very quickly. Had some, it wasn't a straight shot to the top. We grew quick. We started going through and doing acquisitions, and ultimately, I learned from that experience, not from the success, but from some of the pitfalls. We had done a round of venture through several small, what were referred to as SBICs, and we had acquired another large, it was a medium-sized call center and advertising agency locally in Rochester. And as soon as we finished the transaction, we got approached by Draft Worldwide, which is a huge, multinational marketing organization. They said, hey, we were trying to acquire the same company. We were waiting to see if the transaction went through. It has. We were trying to create critical mass for one of our other companies in the area, or the division we had locally. And, would you be interested in buying that? Because now we don't have that critical mass without this acquisition. And, in that process, found out that the deal I had done with them was probably not the best deal. They had first right of refusal on any additional, on follow-on rounds. This is in the back of, back in Y2K. Actually, I got some of my young employees out here. Marissa, do you remember what Y2K is? No. No. Do you, Marissa? No. Okay. Good. Well, Y2K was at when it was the millennium, and we had planned to run the companies parallel till after Y2K. We were dealing with issues, and when we were layering that opportunity in, I had gone to my board and said, hey, listen, this great opportunity popped up. And they're like, okay, go ahead and pursue it. And I said, well, we don't really have the money. You know, we're kind of running the companies parallel for a couple of years. And they said, well, just pursue the deal, go out and look for money in the meantime. As we started going out and looking for money, we started realizing that nobody wanted to talk to us as a result because, you know, they had first right of refusal and they didn't want to invest the time. So ultimately, we ended up getting put against the wall for cash for something that turned out to be, you know, it was a great opportunity, and ended up getting crammed down pretty hard on the transaction. So it was more of a learning experience, and ended up exiting the transaction, you know, favorably by most people's terms, but certainly not what I had anticipated.
So it's interesting. Actually, that sounds a little bit almost like the what happened in The Social Network to the Facebook guy who nobody knows about. But
Yeah.
but let me ask you this: if you were to do it all over again, what are the steps you may have taken to prevent the dilution that you suffered there?
Well, number one, I think I think it's critical that you really know how to keep score. And you know, I was very much caught up into the growth of the company. You know, I was the company was growing in leaps and bounds, and I looked at that as really, you know, that would be the ultimate score, that is just how much revenue you were creating. And you know, I quickly realized that, you know, businesses are a lot like playing darts. There's lots of different types of, you know, there's lots of variations of the game, and you know, and I really didn't know how to keep score, and I wasn't aligned with my shareholders. And you know, as a result of that, you know, I got myself into a position where I was out of sync with them. So, you know, doing it over again, I would make sure that I absolutely was aligned with the outcome, and make sure that I was managing that outcome.
Well, and you specifically got, I know at one point, some advice from a well-known local billionaire. And
Yeah.
I love the story, actually, of how you, first of all, met him, or how you really became a friend of his. And then maybe you can share us what advice he gave you.
So he's referring to Tom Golisano, and at the time we were in the Technoplex, and there's another well-known local real estate developer had come in to talk to us about building out new space, a gentleman by the name of Fred Rinaldi. And you know, while I'm talking to Fred says to me, you know, your story's really interesting. He goes, you know who you need to meet? You need to meet Tom Golisano. And you know, as a young guy, you know, a young man in his early 20s, I'm like, oh yeah, sure. You know, I'd love to meet Tom Golisano. I mean, he was the epitome of an entrepreneur for me. And I didn't really think much of it. And about a week later, I get a call from his assistant saying, hey, Tom Golisano would really like to take you to a Syracuse basketball game. And I was like, oh, okay, that sounds okay. You know, what do I got to be? And so Tom at the time was running for governor. And so I pile into his car, where it was Tom and Fred Rinaldi and Lou Bavona and Gene Policini, who was, you know, an early partner and a good friend of Tom's, and ran Tom's marketing. And you know, I'm here. I am, this guy from Medina, you know, and I'm going out with these guys to Syracuse, and we go to this really nice restaurant, and you know, they're drinking $400 or $500 bottles of wine, and I'm just kind of like sitting back in awe. And then Tom started getting going on politics. And those that know me know that I have a hard time backing away from it. So Tom started talking about something, and I just didn't hit me right. And I said, so that sounds an awful lot like you know, prescribed to the bell curve theory, you know, and the bell curve was a book that went around in the 90s. And he goes, well, if that's what you want to call it, then, you know, then I prescribe to that. And I said, well, if you prescribe to the bell curve theory, I said, I think you're nuts. And I said, and I hope you never get elected. And like, the whole table just went quiet, you know, and like, well, we better get going now, right? And I'm like, I gotta go to the restroom. So I'm coming back, and I think Lou Bavona came up to me and said, Tom Golisano loves you, and he thinks you're hot shit. So it was kind of after that, we ended up, you know, he would call me, and, you know, he became an early mentor of mine. And the story that you were talking about, he would call me up, and I'd go out to analyst conferences with him, and got exposed to, you know, lots of other great companies and CEOs. I remember actually I was with him in Chicago, and we were at a William Blair conference, and I think it's Howard Schultz, the CEO Starbucks.
Yep.
So Starbucks is presenting, and I remember he's talking about all their growth, and this is their plans, and $4 coffees. I remember looking at Tom. I'm like, I don't think this company's going to do too well. I'm like, nobody's ever going to pay for $4 coffees. So my instincts are not always good. So anyway, ended up on the way back. I remember Tom saying to me, he goes, Ken, what did you learn here? What was the most important thing? And I think at the time I was kind of caught up in my own growth, and I said, it's about having a great ecosystem and a great culture in the company. And Tom says, no, he goes, the only thing that matters is return on investment to your shareholders. He says everything else is just a means to that end. And at the time I was a bit dismissive because I was on my own growth path. But as I've gotten older and I've looked back, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, you have to understand how you're keeping score, and make sure that it's aligned with the constituents that that are your investors or your bankers or shareholders in general.
Well, we talked a little bit earlier about scalability, and on some level we talked about that even scaling can be a problem, and we kind of looked at that example from Concentrix. But I know that one of the things that's very interesting about your company and kind of your entrepreneurial philosophy is also your idea about the right way to scale, to grow and scale a company. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in the E-Myth. I don't know if has anybody here read the E-Myth? Yeah, Michael Gerber's book. It's a very short read. I recommend it to everybody that's looking or aspiring to start a company or has a company and wants to grow it. The concept in short is that you look at your business as almost like it's a franchise. And what's a franchise? What's a franchise about? A franchise is about creating predictable outcomes, right? So if you approach your business in a way that you do everything very process driven, or you try to do everything process driven. When I mean that, it doesn't mean you have to be so structured that you can't adjust or change, but focus on creating a predictable outcome. And if you do that, it will allow you to scale much more efficiently versus just trying to look at every problem as as something that's unique or one-off. If you take that approach and you start to grow, you find yourself having to really kind of throw human capital, to solve the problems of your growth or to scale versus doing things in a much more efficient way. So, I think that's part of it. The other part of it is really understanding. The E-Myth is that an entrepreneur would be somebody that works 70, 80 hours a week and wears lots of different hats. And the E-Myth is basically that you really take a look at what you're really good at and be very honest with yourself. And then you go out and you just try to find the absolute smartest people you possibly can that you surround yourself with that have the complementary skill sets that offset, that basically their strengths are your weaknesses. And, to this day, I really believe that that's when you look at companies that have grown very quickly and have done so successfully, whether they call it the E-Myth or not, that's generally a common thread that you'll see in a lot of companies, and we try and do it at our company here.
And it's actually one of the books that in my own company I would say might be the number one or the number two book in terms of the influence it's had as well. And the company that I run is completely not one that could ever be a franchise. But when you think about the idea that if you were to run it as a franchise and write out the rules in a way where great people can step in, really learn this business, and you can give people not just great outcomes, but as you said, predictable outcomes, it's really become such a whole different type of business. And it's really quite antithetical to, I think, this myth, you're right, that also exists, that an entrepreneur is somebody who kind of heroically works and does everything themselves and never gets out of the garage. And it's one of the reasons, I also wholeheartedly recommend it as you do. The other thing that the book does, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is it talks about the difference, or it frames it as that most people who are trying to be entrepreneurs are kind of busy working essentially in the business, while true entrepreneurs work on the business. Absolutely. They delegate everything else they can, and it gives them the perspective necessary to think about it not kind of from the inside, but as somebody's creating a set of systems and business models that work. Love to get your thoughts on that.
No, I absolutely agree with that, and I'm sure my team here is probably looking at saying, "Oh my God, I'm so sick of Ken saying that all the time." but it's the absolute truth. I think that you have to obviously balance it out. If you're in a startup situation, you have to work in it a lot of times because you just don't have the resources necessarily to, offset your particular weaknesses. But I think, as you're kind of growing the company, to have that awareness that that's really the way that you have to ultimately grow your business. And, that always understanding, am I working on it? When do you work on it and when do you work in it? And I don't think it's just for, the CEO or the president. I think it's really just for your management team in general. As you grow, you kind of have to, inject that into your culture and have them understand that too. And, it's not always an easy thing. I think a lot of people, there's a lot of people that will try to automatically kind of, in a negative sense, you might call it micromanage. But a lot of people just want to make sure that the outcome is going to be what it needs to be, and you kind of have to fight that natural instinct and actually pull back at times and figure out, is this really the best way to solve the problem, not just for today, but when this problem comes up, a month from now, and 2 months from now, and into the future.
Well, I want to make sure that we get enough time right now to get some questions from the audience, but maybe before we do that, could we give a round of applause to Candids?